Hello ladies and gentlemen, Gabester here. Today we're doing another monk solo guide for Cho'gall 10 men in Bastion of Twilight. And this finishes out the zone, of course, on normal mode. And Cho'gall is by far the most difficult boss in this zone to solo, way above everything else that you've done up to this point. So here you can take a look at the talents I'm using for this fight. Important stuff is pretty standard chi wave for the efficient heals and damage, healing elixir for extra heals because you don't really have a good time to use the cooldowns otherwise. And then you definitely want your tiger pet as well. You'll also need the glyph of retreat for one of your major glyphs, or prime I guess they're called now, which I won't show, but you know, make sure you pick that up. And then you'll want spinning crane kick as well as fortifying brew for your other prime glyphs. So let's rewind and we'll get started with the walkthrough. Now, the first thing that should be talked about is corrupted blood. As you may recall, the main mechanic for this fight is corruption. So you have a purple meter. For me, it's on the left of the screen there, but I also have one that's easier to read above my target frame. And the basic idea here is that throughout the fight, there are a few abilities that will cause you to gain corrupted blood. And as your blood gets higher, you'll have various effects on you. So in addition to taking extra damage for each point of blood you have, 3% extra damage, when you reach 25, 50, 75, and 100 blood respectively, some other debuff or effect will afflict you. So the problem is, when you reach 25 blood, the first secondary stage of it, you gain corruption accelerated. And this will increase the rate that you gain corruption very rapidly. And the problem with this is that it's a magic debuff, so it's dispellable. But for whatever reason, if you as a monk tank by yourself dispel it with diffuse magic, it immediately gets reapplied to you almost instantaneously. And I cannot figure out why this is, because you know, back in the day, this raid, that was sort of required to dispel it from your healers or whoever, and keep it off people as long as possible. But for some reason, if you're by yourself, it seems that it just instantly reapplies, perhaps because it needs to cast that on 10 total targets, or I don't know how it's coded. In any event, you cannot get rid of it if you're by yourself. So the problem is, in the final phase, when blood is rising on its own, the corruption level, you're going to hit 25 very rapidly. And once you reach 25 and get that debuff, from 25 to 100, you go very quick. When you reach 100 corruption, you cannot heal yourself any longer. And so that sort of acts as a softened rage timer for the encounter. Therefore, the entire goal in the first phase is really focusing on DPSing Cho'gall without gaining any corruption. If you can get to the final phase with 0 corruption, things will be much easier for you. If you go into that last phase with even 10 blood, unless you have really good gear, you're going to have a very difficult time meeting the DPS requirement, because you'll reach that 25 marker and then skyrocket up from there very quickly. So do everything you can to keep your corruption level low or at 0 during the majority of the fight before you get into the final phase at 25% health. Now, the first way to gain corruption in the first phase is from corrupting adherents. So these will spawn very reliably on a timer, and they'll alternate from the left and the right rooms, respectively, the little cubbies there. When one spawns, it will use crash shortly after it spawns, casting a shadow crash on your current location, and it has a slow projectile that you can get out of the way of. If you get hit by crash, though, you're within the AE when it lands, you'll gain 5 corruption. So it's really important that you are very aware of when crash is being cast and you move out of it. I even made a weak aura for myself to know when it's being cast so I can be sure to move. The other thing that can cause corruption from these is they will cast an AE effect called Depravity, which you can see right there was just cast. This has a short cast time, but it is interruptible. and they don't do it all that frequently. The first time they do it is shortly after the very first crash that they spawn, or that they cast. So you have to be very aware and in position when that first depravity is cast. There was that first one following the crash. And then they'll do, I think it's 3 crashes, and then another depravity, and repeat this over and over. So the general idea here to handle the corrupting adherent is to keep yourself moving when crash is being cast, so you don't get hit by the effect since it lands where you were at the time, as well as stay in range to not only DPS them, but to interrupt depravity when it's due. So there you can see as one spawns, I move for crash, then I get close for depravity, and then I keep moving back as I DPS it, and just move past the crash locations as they come out. Now the basic idea that you want to use is to bunch up the adherents when they die in one given location. Doesn't really matter where you choose to do this, but try to get them all near each other, because when they die, they'll spawn pools of blood, and if you stand in these, you also gain corruption. So this is also where ads will spawn later on, which we'll talk about in a moment. But the idea is to keep them somewhat clumped up so that the ads are all spawning from roughly the same location, and that'll make them easier to handle when you get to that part. Now the second thing to consider is Bloods of the Old God. So when you kill the adherents, as mentioned, they drop their little corruption pools where they die. And so you want to try to keep these bunched up, because when Cho'gall uses Fester Blood, which occurs shortly after each adherent spawn, he will cause 4 Bloods of the Old God to appear from each active corruption puddle. And these bloods will chase you at about normal movement speed. And if they reach you in melee range and hit you, you'll gain 3 corruption for every melee hit you take. So obviously getting hit by these is very bad. You don't want that either. So the problem is that while they're stunnable and slowable, there's a lot of targets, and you can't really afford to lose the DPS by hitting them at range, with lightning or something like that. So you need to use something that's efficient to kill them without getting meleeed. But the best way I found to do this is to actually take advantage of the slightly larger radius of your melee AE attacks relative to their melee range. So what you can do, as you'll see here in these clips, is clump them up somewhat. So when they spawn, especially if there's a lot of them, I sort of run around in a half circle using roll and momentum to keep distance. And once they're sort of clumped up more by doing this half circle, I'll slow them with a few keg throws. And this gets them moving very slow, so they're easy to control. At this point, I position Cho'gall so that he is slightly in front of the pack and at the proper distance, so that when I keg smash off of him, the AE radius of keg smash hits the bloods. And this takes some practice, obviously, if you're not used to it. At least it did for me. But the idea, of course, is that by doing this, you can keep your distance from the bloods and kill them without actually letting them get in melee range of you. So here on the 4-pack, the first one, you can see it pretty clearly. So I slow them when they're clumped up. Then I position Cho'gall and myself so that I know they're close enough without getting in melee range of me. And then one keg smash and happen to kill them all there. So very simple. Or not simple, but, effective, I guess. So other than clumping them up, you can hit them with stuff besides keg smash as well. You can use spinning crane kick. So if you can't hit them all with keg smash, which will commonly be the case when there are quite a few of them, you can use spinning crane kick and or breath of fire. And again, just maintaining that distance. So here you can see I didn't get all of them with keg smash. So I used some breath of fire and spinning crane kick to finish them off, and just keeping my separation from them so they don't quite get in melee range of me, but I still hit them with my AE radius. Now the final thing to really consider for this encounter is Fury of Cho'gall. And this is cast about every 45 seconds on Cho'gall's target, and it applies 2 debuffs, actually. but they effectively kind of do the same thing. They increase your shadow and physical damage taken by 20% per stack, and they last a minute. So as the fight progresses, obviously you take more and more damage from most of the damage throughout the encounter. And then, more importantly, when you get to the final phase, where you're taking AE damage just from the room itself, this is shadow, and therefore that will kill you pretty quickly. So you need a way to manage your Fury of Cho'gall stacks at some point in the fight and sort of reset the stack before you push into the final phase. You don't have to go into the final phase with 0 stacks. You can survive with 1 or 2, but you just need to have fewer than you would have at that point with your DPS. So the best time I found to reset this is when the 6th stack would be applied. So when I have 5 stacks, the next cast following that 5th stack is when I purposely reset by forcing the cast to occur on my tiger pet instead of me. So the way you want to do this is you want to summon your tiger pet when there are no adherents that are active, because these are something that will be aggroed by your tiger, and that will cause him not to basically be on the threat list properly for Cho'gall. So make sure there's not an adherent active when you summon him. But that said, you want to summon him a fair bit ahead of when the actual Fury cast is occurring. So I summon my tiger maybe 20 seconds before the next Fury that I want to miss before that's cast. You can see there's a lot of slimes that are spawning around this time, but just move away from them. It doesn't really matter. And then because you have the retreat glyph, when you roll, of course, you will temporarily drop your threat. So the idea is to wait for 3 or 4 seconds before Fury is cast, roll away, and then your tiger pet will have threat for that Fury of Cho'gall cast. And you won't get afflicted, and then your stack can drop off since it's a minute long with a 45-second cooldown. And at that point, then the boss should be low enough that you can push to the final phase with only 1, maybe 2 stacks of Fury of Cho'gall at that point. Alright, so now I'm just going to go through the walkthrough and just kind of step by step what I'm doing here. So one thing is you definitely want to focus on maximizing your DPS on Cho'gall throughout the fight. So just your normal rotation stuff should be a priority. This means keg smash whenever possible. Use your chi wave whenever possible. If your health deficit is a decent amount, use expel harm to do more damage than jab would for the energy cost. All that kind of stuff. And otherwise, just make sure you don't cap out your energy or your chi, and just keep attacking. And generally speaking, obviously your vengeance will climb as your Fury of Cho'gall stacks get higher. So early on, you're not going to do as much DPS as later. But you still want to pre-pot and then save your mid-fight potion for the final phase when you have a pretty sizable DPS burn situation going on. So when I pull the boss, I initially move him to the left side, the left cubby, because that's where the first adherent will spawn. So I'm right in position when he pops up. And then I just grab him, watch for that first crash, and then get in position to interrupt the first depravity. And then once that's taken care of, I know I have a few crashes before the next depravity, so I can position him where I want him to die. So I'm putting the first adherent kind of in the back right corner of that cubby. And then once he dies, and I'm sure that I'm not going to hit a crash as I run out, then I get in position and just hang out a few yards away from the puddle until Fester Blood happens. And so here comes the Bloods. And with only 4, it doesn't take much to clump them up, so I just run a little bit. Basic idea here is that they will catch you eventually, but if you sidestep rather than just backpedal, they won't catch you very quickly. So you can buy yourself a fair bit of time to clump up the Bloods while you're still maintaining your full DPS rotation on Cho'gall. This goes for all of the blood phases. And make sure you take advantage of your heals while you have guard up. So combos are a good idea there. Throw up guard and then immediately expel harm and do some chi wave. Don't forget to take advantage of your heal from Elusive Brew if you have that spec as well from Healing Elixir. So here we have the second adherent, and you'll notice I got in position toward the other cubby on the right this time. Not quite standing in it, just slightly out of it, because I want that adherent to run out a little bit before I actually have to interrupt his first depravity, because it takes a while to get across the room. So you can see I just barely make it, and he would have done another crash and a depravity right after that. So it's about the timing. You want to move him pretty quickly, just sidestepping. And here we have the second set of bloods. So now 8. So I try to position sort of halfway between the puddles so that the path that any given set take is sort of split evenly. So they'll reach me about the same time, and that just clumps them up a little faster. So there you can see I use some spinning crane kick and breath of fire to finish them off. And fury stacks are getting reasonably high now, so you're going to notice you're taking quite a bit more damage than you were early on in the fight. So again, just maintain your heals whenever possible while doing your keg smash and otherwise filler DPS rotation. And don't be afraid to use your cooldowns, Fortifying Brew in particular. Just make sure that the timing is such that it will be up for the last phase, because you'll probably need it for that. So this guy, if you have puddles in the cubby, you might have to move him back into the room a little bit and then move him back toward the cubby. Otherwise, you'd just be boxed in by existing puddles and whatnot when you're trying to move for crash. But the same process just applies. Just get that first depravity right after the crash, and then just back away from the crashes as you position him to die. Another thing you can do is sort of death touch every third or maybe fourth adherent, and that just lets you finish them off really quick. You won't be able to death touch them right away. They have about 1,000,000 health, but after one hit or so. And there's the fury that I talked about that I wanted to reset. So I made myself a weak aura just to remind myself when I had 5 stacks, so I know the next one is the one I want to get on my tiger pet. So I use my tiger pet right at the start of the fight just for extra DPS, but then I save him after that so that he'll be up for this reset position. And so once there's about 20 seconds before the fury, after the adherent has died, and I have 5 stacks, I summon my pet and let him get some aggro on Cho'gall. And then around the time that Fester Blood is being cast is when I'll have to roll away to trigger retreat and get that fury cast on the tiger. And after that, it was the blood that I did just a moment ago. And then here we're on to the next adherent. So this is adherent number 4. And I don't have to actually get him in position. I just want to kill him quickly because Cho'gall's health is at a reasonable level that I can push the phase before Fester Blood. So this will depend greatly on your own gear as well when you can do this. But the basic principle applies. You want to have Cho'gall in position on his throne when he hits 25%. If he's not, you're going to get a lot of those tentacle ads, and these are very dangerous. If they channel that beam, they increase your corrupted blood very quickly, and you'll die very rapidly. So if you have them up here, usually you only get 1, maybe 2, and even if you get 2, they're going to be clumped up. So you can stun them and just hit them with a cake smash and maybe a breath of fire, and they'll die really fast. They should be your priority though. So if you can't kill it before it starts to cast its channel, just interrupt it. Otherwise, if you've gotten to this phase with 0 corrupted blood and pretty low fury stacks, so I was about 2, then you should be able to push through as long as you have reasonable gear. The idea, of course, is to keep yourself topped off and healing, because you'll notice my corrupted blood, now that it's pushed over 25, it's going up very rapidly because of that accelerated magic buff I talked about before that I can't seem to keep off myself even if I dispel it. So I just want to be at full health when I'm about to hit 100, because from that point forward, I won't be able to heal myself. So that's when I'm going to use all my cooldowns, and it looks like Tiger Pet comes off cooldown right around this time as well. So anything you've got to just help you push your DPS and survive through this phase. You can see, but once the heals stop, it's pretty brutal. So guard is also still used, so you can absorb some more damage. But really, this final phase is all about positioning him on the throne and not having corrupted blood leading up to that point. If you've got both those things, then you shouldn't have too much trouble with that final phase. And that is the Monk Solo Guide for Cho'gall 10-man. So as always, thanks so much for watching, and good luck.